they will take that into consideration.
Teresa Pearce.
Afternoon. We've got 3 credit agencies that dominate the market. We've heard that the individuals take great responsibility in the work that they do, that they're just opinions, but they're highly trained, highly experienced, highly paid. Yet, at the same time, you're saying that this is just one piece of information investors should rely on, and they shouldn't rely on your opinions alone. So is what you're saying that investors should do their own modelling, the same modelling that highly paid market-dominant analysts do to make a decision? Are you saying that let the buyer beware? And if that is the case, who can rely on your opinions? Okay, Mr. Crawley.
Right, I'll take that first. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I am going to go back and say what I said at the start, is that ratings are opinions. They are one piece of important, valuable information which is available into the market and available to investors. But there are many other pieces of relevant information around credit decision making that are also available elsewhere in the market. So we absolutely have been absolutely clear that we should not, we do not expect an individual investor or, for that matter, at the other end of the spectrum, a sophisticated asset manager to rely solely on what we provide in the tool that we provide in order to come to a
But wouldn't you think that because you do dominate the market and you are highly paid, that people would have some reliance on your opinion?
We go to extraordinary lengths in terms of time, effort, and money around the way that we dialogue with the market to explain to them what a rating is and what a rating is not. And notwithstanding that, very often we are unpopular in terms of what we do. At the moment in time, we have never had more what I would describe as reverse inquiry from the market, generally wanting to know more about our opinions, research and analysis and our ratings. We spend an enormous amount of time interacting with the market, explaining precisely what a rating is and what it is not, and how it can be used for and how it should not.
Mr. Taylor, what do you think?
So the ratings addressing long-term credit risk, fundamental credit risk. If you're an investor in securities, there are other factors you need to take into account as well. So probably the best example of that recently was that S&P downgraded the US and more investors bought US securities. So they went completely against the direction of the rating change. The reason they did that was because they were looking for liquidity, safe haven. So people don't blindly follow the ratings, often because they have their own credit opinion, which is different to us, that's healthy, but also because there are other factors they're thinking about. Liquidity, pricing, position in their portfolio, where they're not as concerned about the absolute credit, fundamental long-term credit risk, which is what we're opining on.
Okay. Well,
about banks, can I ask you, I'll start with Mr. Crawley, is the rating of financial institutions as reliable as the ratings of corporate debt or other types of ratings?
Yes, I do. I believe it is. It has one layer of added complexity in it, which for the vast majority of, say, industrial corporations doesn't exist, and that is that financial institutions, regulated banks, are highly leveraged entities, and they manage to operate with sort of ongoing system support, access to liquidity, funding from central banks and so on, plus dependent upon the individual financial institution and how important it is to the system. It also gets support from governments in terms of the expectation of future government support. So that is an added layer of complexity around the way that the way that banks are analysed. But no, absolutely, and we have been very conscious of the need to provide greater clarity and transparency to the market around how we see what we describe as the standalone credit profile of a bank standing alone without government support, and how much government support we would factor into a bank's rating.
Mr Taylor, would you agree with that? Perhaps you could focus on this issue about implicit government guarantees, because there does seem to be some ambiguity about exactly how to quantify such a thing. Does that make it more difficult to rate financial institutions?
It's not easy to rate financial institutions. I guess it never has been. It's a very good example of something. It shows how ratings work. So during the financial crisis, we saw many banks fail. So they needed support. So the level of bank failures to, say, corporate failures is something like 10 times the level. But you don't see it in the debt markets, because the banks didn't default. They kept paying their securities. So even though they were failing, they were still paying their debt instruments. So one of the things we've been wrestling with over the last couple of years, as the debate has happened amongst policymakers, is we think in many markets the level of central support will come down for financial institutions. So therefore you're more reliant upon their standalone strength, the strength as an individual institution. So how do you build that into the ratings? How do you take away the support that would have been there in the past, and look at them as more of a standalone basis? So if you look at our financial institution ratings, if you look at all financial institutions ratings over the last 3 years or so, they've been coming down. Not down into non-investment grade, but down from, by a couple of notches maybe. So it shows ratings adjusting to the new reality of less support assumed going forward. But it's different in different markets. So we wouldn't have assumed less support in China, for example. We assume less support in the UK.
Well, that doesn't sound too scientific. Is your evaluation of financial institutions as solidly based as it is for others?
The standalone financial strength can be assessed. Obviously, at the same time they're losing support, their capital's going up, their asset base is getting stronger, so you can assess that, you can measure it. It's never going to be an exact science of knowing exactly what's going to happen. It'll come down to the specific situation, decision of governments. We can't predict that. We can put our best judgment in place and explain it. We can't predict it.
Can I ask you, Mr Drevon, when Moody's downgraded, I think it was 12 UK financial firms, Lloyd's commented that Moody's was reflecting what was already understood in the market. I think they were suggesting that the credit reference agencies were a lagging indicator in that regard. Is that often the case? Do you just reflect what the market's saying?
In fact, I think when you look at the level of support from a systemic point of view around financial institutions, is in fact a good examples where we did not lag the market, and in fact had a quite different opinion. Before the start of the financial crisis, we had in fact taken the view that systemic support was going to be in generally quite high for a number of countries, and we had assigned ratings which included that level of systemic support. That assumption, in fact, held very well during the financial crisis. But obviously, over the last 2-3 years, we have, as with every other market participant, understood that this was an evolving situation, that each country was approaching this in a different way, with, in general, a reduction in the level of systemic support to be expected. So we have reflected that in our rating on an ongoing basis, not only for the UK, but also for a number of other European countries, differentiating between what we would view as very large financial institutions, which are more likely to receive some degree of systemic support, and smaller financial institutions.
Mr Crawley, let me ask you, has the Lloyds were making the point that it would have minimal impact on their funding costs, the downgrading. Has that proved to be correct so far? Have the financial institutions, as a result of the downgrading of the credit reference agencies, had a material increase in their funding costs?
I'd like to be helpful. I actually don't have that information to hand, but it would not surprise me at all if it had not had a material impact.
So, in effect, you are a lagging indicator. The market was already pricing in you said laterally.
the pricing of credit risk at any one time is affected by a whole variety of different factors, vagaries of market sentiment, supply and demand, many other factors.
Mr. Reid, perhaps I'll ask you it's an entirely different question. The European Commission has proposed that issuers should be informed of rating changes in advance, and also that announcements should be published outside market hours. How will that affect?
The logistics of that can actually be very challenging. At the moment within Europe we have a 12-hour rule. So you inform the issuer and then you have to wait 12 hours before you actually publish the opinion that you have or the rating change. That 12-hour time period obviously leaves a window for potential market abuse of that information. The longer that there's been some proposals that those timeframes become longer, which would obviously heighten those risks. Historically, we would reach out to an issuer, communicate the change to them, and within the space of about an hour, we would communicate that change to the market, which seemed fairly effective.
Can I ask you, Mr. Drevon, what difference will it make in terms of the issuer? Will it give them enough more time than is absolutely necessary to prepare their response?
Well, in our point of view, I think we were not in favour of the 12-hour rule. We felt that it would create potential market situations where information which should not be disclosed would be disclosed to the marketplace. And we've worked generally within the principle that when there is information that should be made available, it should be made available to the market as soon as possible. So I think that the principle that doesn't go in the right direction, and arguably 12 hours is sufficient for any issuer to review a potential press release and comment on how we are correct in terms of the facts, or if we are not providing to the market any confidential information. You do not need 24 hours or 36 hours to do that. There is a separate appeals process that is available to any issuer who disagrees with a rating decision, and we have a specific separate process that ensures that this appeals process provides with the issuers the adequate process in terms of us revisiting and reviewing a rating.